The EF4 tornado ripped through our subdivision like God's own chainsaw, turning our two-story colonial into splinters in under 60 seconds. When the roaring stopped and we crawled out of our storm cellar, my wife Linda stood frozen among the wreckage, clutching our 6-year-old daughter Emma, while our 4-year-old son Tyler cried for his toy dinosaurs buried somewhere in the debris. Insurance would take months. Our savings were already drained from Linda's cancer treatments last year. With nowhere else to turn, I loaded my shattered family into our dented Honda and drove toward my childhood home in Nebraska. The 4-hour drive through the aftermath felt like traveling through a war zone. Twisted metal and splintered wood littered the highway shoulders. Emergency vehicles screamed past us heading toward devastated communities. Linda hadn't spoken since we left the ruins of our house, just stared out the passenger window while Emma and Tyler dozed fitfully in the back seat, exhausted from crying. I kept telling myself that everything would be okay once we reached my parents' place. Mom and Dad had always been there for us during tough times. When Linda was going through chemotherapy, Mom drove 6 hours to help with the kids every weekend. Dad had even offered to co-sign our mortgage when we bought the house. Surely they would open their doors to us now. The familiar gravel driveway crunched under our tires as we pulled up to the sprawling ranch house where I'd grown up. Everything looked exactly the same. The white fence posts, the red barn in the distance, the wraparound porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings. But something felt different. My younger brother Troy's massive black pickup truck sat in the circular drive next to Mom and Dad's new RV. Strange. Troy lived in Lincoln with his wife and kids. I helped Linda and the children out of the car, our clothes still dusty from crawling through debris. Emma clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, now missing one ear from the tornado. Tyler dragged a small suitcase we'd hastily packed with whatever salvageable clothes we could find. Mom answered the door before I could knock. Carol Matthews had always been a warm, welcoming woman, but the expression on her face made my stomach drop. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest, and her smile looked forced, like she was greeting unwelcome salespeople. "Oh, Donovan," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "This is such a terrible situation. We saw the news about the tornado. How awful." "Mom, we lost everything," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. "The house is completely gone. We need somewhere to stay while we figure things out." Dad appeared behind her, avoiding eye contact and mumbling something about complications. Frank Matthews had never been much for emotional conversations, but this cold distance felt wrong. These were his grandchildren standing on his porch, homeless and scared. "Well, the thing is," Mom continued, wringing her hands, "Troy and his family are staying with us right now. They moved in last month after the divorce. You know how hard that's been on everyone." Through the open door, I could see into the familiar living room. Troy's ex-wife Stephanie sat on the leather sofa I remembered from childhood, painted nails tapping on her phone screen. Their twin boys, Mason and Logan, were sprawled on the carpet playing video games on a massive television I'd never seen before. Troy himself emerged from the kitchen, wearing an expensive-looking polo shirt and designer jeans. "Hey there, big brother," Troy said, with that smirk I remembered too well from our childhood. "Heard you had some weather troubles." The casual cruelty in his tone made my hands clench into fists. Weather troubles. Like our entire life hadn't just been obliterated. "We need help, Troy," I said, trying to keep my voice level for the kids' sake. "Just temporarily until insurance comes through." Stephanie looked up from her phone with theatrical concern. "Oh my goodness, that's just terrible. But you know how it is with the boys' schooling situation. We can't disrupt their routine right now." Mason and Logan glanced over at Emma's muddy clothes and Tyler's broken backpack, then started snickering. Emma pressed closer to Linda's leg, sensing the hostility, even if she couldn't understand it. "The guest rooms are occupied," Mom explained, as if that settled everything. "Troy's family is using both of them. The house is just too crowded right now." I stared at my parents in disbelief. This was the same house where Mom used to insist we set extra places at dinner in case unexpected guests stopped by. The same house where Dad had built a tree house, specifically so neighborhood kids would want to play in our yard. What about the basement, or even the living room? We're not asking for luxury, just a roof over our heads. Troy stepped forward, and I could smell expensive cologne. Look, Donovan, I hate to say this, but maybe this is a wake-up call. Should have thought about tornado insurance before buying that fancy house. Financial responsibility is important when you have kids to think about. The hypocrisy was staggering. Troy was lecturing me about financial responsibility while living rent-free in our parents' house after his own marriage fell apart. Stephanie nodded along, as if she hadn't been spending his money on designer handbags while their marriage crumbled. Dad finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. There's the barn if you're really desperate. It's not heated, but there's electricity. The barn, where we kept hay and farm equipment. He was suggesting his son and grandchildren sleep in a barn like animals. Frank, Mom hissed, elbowing him sharply. We'll figure something else out. I said, my pride finally overriding my desperation. I couldn't expose my children to this level of family cruelty. As we walked back toward our damaged car, Tyler looked up at me with confused eyes. Daddy, why doesn't Uncle Troy want us to stay? Are we bad people now? The question hit me like a physical blow. I knelt down and pulled both kids into a hug, fighting back tears. Nobody. You're perfect. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense. Linda finally spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. Get us out of here, Donovan, please. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the house through my rearview mirror. Through the large dining room window, I could see my family setting up what looked like a birthday party. Balloons, a decorated cake wrapped gifts on the table. They were celebrating Troy's 35th birthday while we drove away homeless. My brother and his family were laughing and embracing inside the warm house, while my children shivered in the back seat of our damaged car. The message was crystal clear. There was room for celebration, but no room for family in crisis. Night was falling as we drove through the outskirts of Omaha, and I had no idea where we were going. The gas gauge showed less than a quarter tank, and our checking account had maybe $200 left after Linda's latest medical bills. I tried calling Linda's sister Rachel in Denver, putting the phone on speaker while I drove. Rachel's voice was tense and unwelcoming when she answered. Oh God, Donovan, I heard about the tornado on the news. That's just awful, but honestly, my apartment lease specifically forbids extended guests. The management company is really strict about it. I could get evicted. Another door slammed shut. I hung up and tried my old army buddy Kevin, who lived across town. Kevin and I had served 2 tours together in Afghanistan. Surely he would understand what it meant to have each other's backs. Kevin's wife Angela answered instead. Donovan, sweetie, I'm so sorry about your house, but Kevin's not here. Actually, you know what, this isn't a good time for visitors. We're dealing with our own problems right now. Angela, we just need a couch for a couple of nights. My kids are exhausted. I'm sorry, but no. If you show up here, I'll have to call the police. Nothing personal. She hung up before I could respond. Linda reached over and squeezed my hand, her own trembling with exhaustion and fear. Try the homeless shelters, she whispered. I called 3 different shelters in Omaha. All were full to capacity with tornado victims from multiple counties. The 4th shelter had a waiting list 3 weeks long. Tyler started crying again in the back seat. I'm hungry, Daddy, and I'm cold. We stopped at a McDonald's, spending precious money on Happy Meals. Emma picked at her chicken nuggets while Tyler colored on the paper placemat with broken crayons from the bottom of Linda's purse. Other families in the restaurant stared at us with a mixture of pity and judgment. We looked like what we were disaster victims with nowhere to go. In the bathroom, Emma threw up her dinner stress and exhaustion overwhelming her small body. Linda cleaned her up with rough paper towels, while I stood guard outside the door, feeling like a complete failure as a husband and father. We ended up at a highway rest stop, reclining the car seats as much as possible to create makeshift beds. Linda curled up with Emma in the back while Tyler crawled into the front passenger seat with me. The temperature was dropping, and our summer clothes weren't enough to keep us warm. At 3 in the morning, a state trooper tapped on my window with his flashlight. I rolled it down, squinting in the bright beam. "Can't stay here overnight, sir. Safety regulations." "Officer, we're tornado victims. We lost our house yesterday. We're just trying to find somewhere safe for my kids to sleep." His expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I still can't let you camp here. There's a 24-hour diner about 5 miles up the highway. They might let you sit in there until morning." We drove to the diner and spent the remaining night hours nursing coffee and hot chocolate we couldn't afford, taking turns napping in the booth, while the other watched the kids. The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Dolores, eventually told us we had to order food or leave. As dawn broke, I noticed steam rising from under our car's hood. The radiator was leaking coolant, probably damaged in the tornado debris we'd driven through. One more problem we couldn't afford to fix. Emma's forehead felt hot when I touched it. She was developing a fever, but we had no money for a doctor visit or prescription medicine. We tried 3 different churches, hoping to find someone willing to help a family in crisis. The first told us they don't handle emergency assistance. The second gave us a pamphlet about a soup kitchen that opened at noon. The third listened to our story with sympathy, then explained they could pray for us, but had no facilities for housing. By afternoon, we were camping under a highway overpass with 2 other homeless families. The concrete provided some shelter from the wind, but the constant traffic noise made it impossible to rest. Tyler was fascinated by the other children, sharing his broken crayons and asking innocent questions about why everyone was living outside. Linda's fever was getting worse. She sat propped against our suitcase, shivering despite the warm afternoon sun. I knew we needed medical help, but emergency room visits cost thousands of dollars we simply didn't have. While digging through our belongings looking for Linda's fever reducer medication, my fingers found an envelope I'd missed in our hasty packing. With growing dread, I opened it and found a foreclosure notice dated 3 days before the tornado. The bank was already taking our house. All those medical bills from Linda's cancer treatment had put us behind on mortgage payments. We'd been trying to work out a payment plan, but the bureaucracy moved slowly. The tornado had simply finished what financial ruin had already started. I stared at the legal document, my last shred of hope crumbling. We hadn't just lost our home to a natural disaster. We'd been losing it all along, one unpaid bill at a time. The tornado had actually been a mercy, destroying something that was never really ours anymore anyway. Linda saw the expression on my face and knew without asking. She started crying silently, her shoulders shaking with fever and despair. We'd been living in Hartwell Park for 3 days when I first noticed the black Mercedes. The city had opened the park as an emergency shelter area for tornado victims, and about 15 families had set up temporary camps under the pavilion and scattered throughout the grounds. Jorge Ramirez and his family of 5 had claimed the space next to ours. Jorge was a construction worker whose house had been in the same tornado path as ours. His wife Maria spoke limited English, but she shared food with us and helped Linda with the children when the fever made her too weak to stand. The Patel family occupied the pavilion's far corner. Raj had owned a small convenience store that was completely destroyed. His teenage daughter Priya helped Emma with homework they'd gotten from the school district's emergency education program. Everyone was struggling, but there was a sense of community among the displaced families. We shared resources, watched each other's children, and took turns making runs to the food bank and donation centers. But that black Mercedes kept circling the park's perimeter. I noticed it first on Tuesday morning, slowing down as it passed the main entrance. By Thursday, I'd seen it 3 different times, always moving slowly, as if the driver was studying our makeshift camp. "You see that car too, right?" Jorge asked during one of our evening conversations around the camping stove someone had donated. "The fancy one, yeah, I've been wondering about that. Maria thinks it's immigration officers, but I told her we're legal. Been citizens for 10 years. Linda looked up from where she was helping Emma brush her teeth at the water fountain. "Maybe it's a reporter. They've been coming around all week." That was true. Local news crews had been interviewing families for their tornado recovery special segments. Reporter Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 had asked me particularly pointed questions about our family situation, pressing for details about why we weren't staying with relatives. My honest answer about parental rejection had apparently made for compelling television. The segment aired Tuesday night with me explaining how my parents had turned us away while my brother's family enjoyed their hospitality. Sometimes the people you expect to help you the most are the ones who disappoint you the deepest, I'd told Jennifer. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. The interview had gotten more attention than I'd expected. My phone, when I could charge it at the park's electrical outlet, buzzed constantly with Facebook notifications and messages from strangers offering sympathy. But the Mercedes wasn't from a news station. It had tinted windows and no identifying marks. And whoever was driving seemed specifically interested in our section of the park. Thursday evening, while Linda was at the community center shower facility, I noticed the car parked across from the hospital entrance. That seemed like an odd coincidence, since Linda had taken Emma there earlier for fever treatment. "Daddy the nice man helped me find my dinosaur," Tyler announced when I was tucking him into his sleeping bag. "What nice man, buddy?" "The one with the good-smelling car. He saw me crying because I lost my brontosaurus and he helped me look in the bushes. He found it stuck under that big rock." My blood went cold. "Tyler, what did this man look like?" "He had a fancy suit like the men on TV, and he smelled like Mommy's good soap. He asked me about our tent and if Daddy was taking good care of us." A stranger had been talking to my 4-year-old son. My protective instincts went into overdrive. "Did he ask you any other questions?" "He wanted to know if Daddy was sad about Grandma and Grandpa. I told him yes because you cried in the car." I looked around the park with new awareness. Someone with money and resources was watching my family. But why and what did they want? Friday morning brought an unexpected discovery. Someone had left a bag of fresh coffee and breakfast sandwiches at our campsite while we were at the donated clothing distribution. There was no note, no explanation, just good food that none of the other families had received. When Linda took Emma to the pharmacy to pick up antibiotics, the prescription was already paid for. The pharmacist said an anonymous benefactor had covered the cost that morning. "People are good," Linda said when she returned with the medicine. "There are still angels in the world." But I wasn't so sure these were random acts of kindness. Someone was specifically helping our family, and I had a growing suspicion it was connected to the Mercedes and Tyler's nice man. Saturday afternoon, while the kids napped in the tent, I saw the car again. This time, instead of driving past, it pulled into the parking lot and sat there for nearly an hour. I could make out the silhouette of a single person in the driver's seat, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see details. My phone buzzed with a news alert. The tornado interview had gone viral on social media, shared thousands of times, with hashtags like Dow family betrayal and Toron victims. People were outraged by my parents' treatment of their own grandchildren. Some enterprising internet users had tracked down my parents' address and were posting it online. There were photos of protesters gathering outside their house with signs reading, "Room for greed, no room for family," and "These grandparents turned away homeless kids." Mom's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. Dad's roofing business was getting negative reviews from strangers. Troy's social media accounts had been found and were receiving similar treatment. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, people could see the truth about my family's priorities. But another part worried about how this public pressure might affect my children. Emma and Tyler didn't understand why strangers were angry at Grandma and Grandpa. As evening approached, the Mercedes drove slowly through the park one final time. But instead of leaving it parked near the playground and the engine shut off, my heart pounded as I watched the driver's door open. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit stepped out, straightened his tie, and began walking directly toward our campsite. The moment of truth was approaching, and I had no idea whether this stranger was a threat or an answer to prayers. The man approaching our campsite looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom meeting. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his leather shoes gleaming despite the park's dusty paths. Everything about him screamed wealth and success, which made his presence in our homeless encampment even more surreal. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cultured and confident. "Are you Donovan Matthews?" I stood up from where I'd been organizing our meager possessions, positioning myself between this stranger and my family. "Who's asking?" "My name is Charles Morrison. I saw your interview on the news and I'd like to help." Linda emerged from our tent with Emma both looking wary. The other families in the park had stopped their evening activities to watch this unusual interaction. "Help how?" I asked, not relaxing my guard. Charles reached into his jacket and I tensed until he pulled out a business card. "I run a technology company in Kansas City. I also operate a charitable foundation that assists families in crisis." The card was heavy, expensive stock with embossed lettering. Morrison Tech Solutions with Charles listed as CEO and founder. "Mr. Matthews, I'd like to pay for hotel accommodations for every family in this park. Clean beds, hot showers, room service if you want it. You've all been through enough." Jorge had wandered over to listen along with Raj Patel and several other fathers. The offer seemed too good to be true. "What's the catch?" Jorge asked suspiciously. "Rich guys don't just hand out hotel rooms to homeless people." Charles smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. "No catch. Sometimes those of us who have been blessed financially need to help those facing temporary hardships." But his attention kept returning to my children. When Emma peeked out from behind Linda's legs, his eyes filled with unexpected emotion. When Tyler emerged from the tent dragging his rescued dinosaur, Charles actually took a step backward as if he'd been struck. "Your children are beautiful," he said, his voice suddenly thick. "How old are they?" "Emma's 6, Tyler's 4. Linda answered cautiously. "The same ages as—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I'm sorry. You remind me of someone I used to know." There was definitely more to this story. Charles Morrison wasn't just a generous businessman. His interest in our family felt deeply personal. "Mr. Morrison, can I ask why you specifically came to find us? I mean, there are disaster relief organizations, Red Cross official channels for this kind of help." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You served in Afghanistan, didn't you? I can tell by the way you carry yourself." The observation caught me off guard. "2 tours with the 10th Mountain Division. How did you know that—" "My brother was in the Army. He always said you could spot fellow soldiers by their bearing, the way they scan for threats, protect their families." Something in his tone made me look more closely at his face. There was grief there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Linda asked gently. "David was killed by an IED outside Kandahar in 2010. He was 22 years old." The date hit me like a physical blow. I'd been in Kandahar in 2010, October specifically, when several IED attacks had targeted American convoys. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, meaning it. "That was a dangerous time. We lost too many good soldiers." Charles was studying my face intently now, as if searching for some sign of recognition. "David's unit was hit on October 15th. 3 soldiers were wounded. 1 was killed 3 days later from his injuries." October 15th. I remembered that day with crystal clarity because it had been one of the worst of my deployment. Our convoy had been following another unit when the explosion happened. We'd been first responders to the scene. The Morrison brothers. I said slowly, the memory surfacing. David Morrison was the soldier with the leg trauma, brown hair, freckles, kept asking about his brother Charlie back home. Charles went completely still. "You were there." It wasn't a question, he already knew. "You tried to save his life. You stayed with him in the medical tent for 3 days. You were holding his hand when he died." The park seemed to fade away around us. Linda gasped, understanding that we were witnessing something profound and painful. "David wrote a letter home before he deployed." Charles continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He told me that if anything happened to him, I should find the soldier who stayed with him and thank him. He said your name was Donovan, and you told him stories about your future wife and the kids you wanted to have someday. I remembered. David had been so young, so scared. I talked to him about my plans to marry Linda, about wanting children, about building a life after the war. Anything to keep him conscious and fighting. He made me promise to tell his brother Charlie that he tried to be brave. I said, my own voice breaking. He wanted you to know he wasn't scared at the end. Charles was crying now, tears streaming down his face, despite his expensive suit and professional demeanor. You stayed with a stranger for 3 days. You held my brother's hand so he wouldn't die alone. Emma had come out from behind Linda and was staring up at Charles with concern. Why is the nice man crying, Daddy? Because sometimes grown-ups cry when they remember people they love, sweetheart. Tyler, who had no filter or understanding of adult complexity, walked right up to Charles and offered him his stuffed dinosaur. This always makes me feel better when I'm sad. Charles knelt down to Tyler's level, accepting the toy with trembling hands. Thank you, son. That's very kind. Looking at Charles, kneeling in the dirt, holding my child's comfort toy, while grieving his brother, I finally understood. This wasn't random charity. This was a debt of honor he'd been carrying for over a decade. You didn't have to find me, I told him. I was just doing what any soldier would do. No, he said firmly, standing up and wiping his eyes. David told me you risked your own safety to stay with him. You could have been reassigned, but you chose to remain. That kind of courage and compassion can't be repaid with words. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. I'm booking every family here into the Embassy Suites downtown, adjoining rooms, meal vouchers, anything you need. But he wasn't done. Mr. Matthews, I'd like to offer you a position with my foundation, Executive Director of Family Services. Good salary, benefits, the chance to help other families like yours. The generosity was overwhelming, but I had to ask the obvious question. Charles, why now? You could have found me years ago. He smiled sadly. I tried? But you'd moved several times, gotten married, started a family. It wasn't until your interview went viral that I was able to locate you. When I saw your situation, saw your children, I knew David would want me to do more than just say thank you. Linda had been listening to this entire exchange with growing amazement. This is really happening, she whispered. There's something else, Charles continued. David had plans before he deployed. He wanted to start a foundation for military families facing hardship. He'd saved up $12,000 for the project. I've been holding on to that money for 13 years, not knowing what to do with it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I'd like to honor his memory by rebuilding not just your life, but creating something that helps other families avoid what you've been through. As if his words had summoned them, my phone started buzzing with notifications. The viral video had reached my parents' social media. Troy's business was getting flooded with negative reviews. People were posting pictures of protesters outside my childhood home. Your family is experiencing some consequences for their choices, Charles observed, noticing my phone. Social media can be a powerful force for accountability. For the first time since the tornado, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope and something else, the possibility of justice. Charles had us moved to the Embassy Suites that same evening. Watching Emma and Tyler's faces as they explored our 2-room suite was worth more than any apology my parents could ever offer. Tyler spent 20 minutes just flushing the toilet and watching it refill, marveling at indoor plumbing after days in the park. Emma discovered cable television and found a cartoon channel curling up in a real bed with clean sheets for the first time in a week. Linda soaked in the bathtub while I stood on the balcony with Charles looking out over the city lights of Omaha. He'd changed into casual clothes, jeans, and a polo shirt, looking more like a regular person than the businessman who'd approached us in the park. Tell me about David, I said. What was he like before the deployment? Charles smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him. Stubborn as hell, always trying to prove himself because he was the younger brother. I was already making good money in tech, and he felt like he needed to do something important too, something that mattered. He pulled out his phone and showed me pictures. David at high school graduation. David in basic training, David home on leave, wearing his dress uniform. He was going to study engineering when he got back, had this whole plan to design better protective equipment for soldiers. He'd read about IED casualties and wanted to save lives. The irony was heartbreaking. David had died from the very type of attack he'd hoped to help prevent. After he was killed, I threw myself into building the company, made my first $1 million by 25, had $10 million by 30, but none of it felt meaningful. I was just accumulating wealth while carrying this debt to a soldier I'd never met. You don't owe me anything, Charles. I wish I could have done more for David. You did everything possible. The doctors told me he wouldn't have survived those 3 days without someone advocating for him, keeping him alert, giving him reasons to keep fighting. Charles pulled a folded letter from his wallet, the paper worn from years of handling. David wrote this the night before the convoy. Want to read it? The letter was addressed to Charles in David's careful handwriting. Charlie, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home like we planned. But I want you to know I'm not scared anymore. There's this soldier here named Donovan who's been looking out for me. He's got plans to marry his girlfriend when he gets home, wants to have kids and build a real life. Listening to him talk about the future makes me believe in hope again. If something happens to me, find him and tell him David Morrison said thanks for showing me what courage really looks like. And Charlie, don't spend your whole life being angry about this. Find a way to build something good from something bad. That's what Donovan would do. I had to stop reading. My eyes were too blurry to continue. He saw something in you that changed his perspective in his final weeks, Charles said. That letter is the reason I've spent the last 13 years building a fortune instead of just drowning in grief. We talked until late into the night. Charles told me about building Morrison Tech from a small web development company into a major player in cloud computing. He'd sold the business 2 years ago for $47 million and had been looking for a meaningful way to use the money ever since. When I saw your interview, saw your children's faces, I knew this was what David would want me to do. He talked about how important family was, how the real battle was coming home, and building something worth defending. The next morning, Charles took us to breakfast and laid out his complete plan. He'd been quietly researching our situation since the viral video learning about the foreclosure, Linda's medical bills, our financial struggles. I bought your house from the bank, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. Linda nearly choked on her coffee. You what? The foreclosure was finalized yesterday morning. I purchased the property and the surrounding tornado-damaged lots. 14 houses total. I stared at him in disbelief. Charles, you can't just buy someone's house. I can, and I did. But here's the thing, I don't want to own it. I want to rebuild it and give it back to you, along with the other 13 houses for other families. He spread architectural drawings across the restaurant table. Morrison Memorial Village, affordable housing for military families and disaster victims, solar panels, storm shelters, community center playground designed by children who've experienced trauma. The drawings were beautiful and detailed. Each house was larger than what we'd lost with modern efficiency features and safety improvements. You want me to run this project, Inisao? I asked. I want you to design it. You understand what families in crisis actually need because you've lived it. The foundation would provide wraparound services, job training, financial counseling, childcare, medical assistance. Emma climbed into Charles's lap while he was explaining the plans, completely comfortable with this man, who'd become part of our lives overnight. She traced the playground designs with her finger. Will there be swings? She asked. The biggest, best swings in Nebraska, Charles promised. Tyler looked up from his coloring book. Uncle Charlie, are you going to live there too? Uncle Charlie. My children had instinctively adopted this man who'd walked out of David's memory, and into our desperate need. "I'll visit all the time," Charles said, "but it's going to be your daddy's special place to help other families." That afternoon, we drove out to see the tornado damage. Our old neighborhood was still a wasteland of broken foundations and scattered debris. But Charles walked through the destruction with the confidence of someone who saw opportunity instead of devastation. "Foundation inspection shows most of the underground infrastructure survived," he explained. "We can rebuild on the existing lots, but with better materials, better design." Standing in what used to be our living room, now just a concrete pad surrounded by twisted metal, I tried to imagine the community Charles was describing. "Why are you really doing this?" I asked him. "And don't say it's just about David. This is $40 million worth of community development." Charles was quiet for a moment, picking up a fragment of brick that might have been from our fireplace. "Because David was right in that letter. We have to find ways to build something good from something bad. Your family's suffering isn't meaningful unless we transform it into something that prevents other families from suffering the same way." He looked around at the destruction. "This tornado revealed who your family really is, but it also revealed who you really are. David saw that quality in you 13 years ago. I see it now." As we drove back toward town, Charles made a phone call that I couldn't help overhearing. "Janet, it's Charles Morrison. I need you to run a complete financial investigation on Troy Matthews in Lincoln, Nebraska. Business practices, tax filings, everything. And cross-reference any financial connections to Frank and Carol Matthews." He hung up and noticed my questioning look. "Your brother's about to learn that public scrutiny has consequences. My investigators found some interesting discrepancies in his contractor license applications and tax filings. Justice was coming, and it would be thorough." The next 2 weeks unfolded like a whirlwind of vindication and opportunity. Charles's legal team worked with military efficiency, uncovering layers of fraud that went far deeper than any of us had expected. Troy's construction business had been operating with an expired license for 8 months, taking payment for jobs while legally unqualified to perform them. He'd been claiming his residence as a business headquarters on tax forms while living rent-free with our parents. Most damaging of all, he'd been slowly draining money from Dad's retirement account, forging signatures on withdrawal forms. The first domino fell when local newspapers picked up the investigative story. "Local contractor accused of fraud while homeless family sleeps in park" ran as a front-page headline in the Omaha World-Herald. By Friday, federal investigators were at my parents' house executing a search warrant. Troy's panicked phone call came at 6 in the morning. "Donovan, you have to call off your rich friend. This has gone too far." "I didn't call anyone off, Troy. You created this mess yourself." "They're seizing my business records, my computers, everything. Stephanie already filed for full custody of the boys and moved back to her mother's. My life is falling apart." The irony wasn't lost on me. Troy was experiencing the same desperate helplessness my family had felt when he'd laughed at our homelessness. "Maybe this is a wake-up call," I told him using his own words from that terrible night at our parents' house. Financial responsibility is important when you have kids to think about. The silence stretched between us before he hung up. Meanwhile, Charles's foundation was moving forward with incredible momentum. Morrison Memorial Village had attracted attention from military advocacy groups, disaster relief organizations, and even state government officials who wanted to use our project as a model for other communities. Governor Richardson announced that Nebraska would provide matching funds for any private investment in veteran housing initiatives. Suddenly, our 14-house development had expanded to a 40-house community with commercial space and a medical clinic. I found myself in the unexpected position of being interviewed as a community development expert. Linda laughed when she saw me on the morning news explaining affordable housing strategies to a reporter. 6 months ago, you were installing drywall for $12 an hour. Now you're a housing policy expert. Charles is a good teacher, and apparently I'm a good student when I'm motivated. The children were thriving in ways that amazed me. Emma had started drawing again, creating elaborate plans for the Memorial Village playground. Tyler had appointed himself as Charles's official helper, carrying his briefcase and asking serious questions about construction timelines. The viral video's impact continued spreading in unexpected directions. Military veterans from across the country had started sharing their own stories of family rejection and civilian misunderstanding. The hashtag military family support was trending with thousands of posts about the challenges veterans face when returning to civilian life. Charles used this momentum to announce a national expansion of the Morrison Foundation. "Military families sacrifice for all of us," he said during a press conference. "The least we can do is make sure they have stable housing and community support when they come home." But the most satisfying moment came when my parents finally attempted to make contact. Mom called on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing construction permits with Charles at the foundation's temporary office. "Donovan, sweetheart, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We made some mistakes when you came to us for help." Mistakes. The word was inadequate for the cruelty they'd shown. We were overwhelmed with Troy's situation and we didn't handle things well. But we'd like to make it right. We want to see our grandchildren. Where were you when Emma had a fever and we were sleeping under a highway overpass, Mom? Where were you when Tyler was asking me why Grandma and Grandpa didn't love us anymore? We know we hurt you, but Troy's legal troubles have made us realize that we've been enabling the wrong child. He stole from your father's retirement, Donovan. While we were giving him a free place to live, he was robbing us blind. The admission felt hollow, too little, and too late. So now that Troy has burned you, you want to reconnect with the son who's doing well for himself? It's not like that. We love you. We've always loved you. You have a funny way of showing love, Mom. Charles had been listening to my side of the conversation with growing intensity. He gestured for me to put the call on speaker. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Charles Morrison. I'm the friend who's been helping your son's family." "Oh, Mr. Morrison, thank you so much for everything you've done. We're so grateful." "Are you grateful enough to acknowledge your mistakes publicly? Your grandchildren deserve an apology, not just private phone calls when it's convenient for you." Mom was quiet for a long moment. We could make a public statement if that would help heal the family." "It's not about helping the family," I interjected. "It's about taking responsibility for your choices. You turned away homeless grandchildren because it was inconvenient. Own that." The public apology came 2 days later, posted on Dad's roofing company Facebook page, and shared across Mom's social media accounts. "Frank and Carol Matthews want to publicly apologize to our son Donovan and his family. When they came to us after losing their home in the tornado, we failed them as parents and grandparents. We chose comfort over compassion and enabled our other son's poor choices instead of supporting the family member who needed us most. We are deeply sorry for our actions and hope to earn forgiveness through changed behavior, not just words. We also want to publicly support the Morrison Memorial Village project and encourage others to donate to this worthy cause." The apology was shared thousands of times with mixed reactions from the public. Some people appreciated their accountability. Others felt it was too little, too late. I felt somewhere in between. The apology was necessary, but it didn't erase the trauma my children had experienced. Emma surprised me with her reaction when I read the apology to her. "Does this mean Grandma and Grandpa learned their lesson?" she asked. "I think maybe they did, sweetheart." "Then we should forgive them. Uncle Charlie says forgiveness is how we heal from bad things." Out of the mouths of babes. My 6-year-old daughter had more wisdom about grace and redemption than most adults. The groundbreaking ceremony for Morrison Memorial Village was scheduled for the 1-year anniversary of the tornado. Media coverage had attracted national attention with congressional representatives and military leaders planning to attend. But the most meaningful moment came during a private dinner with Charles the night before the ceremony. "David would be proud," he said, raising his glass in a toast, We found a way to build something beautiful from something broken. We all did, Linda added. Even Donovan's parents learned something about what family really means. Charles had become more than a benefactor. He'd become family in the truest sense, chosen rather than inherited. As we tucked the children into bed that night in our temporary apartment, Tyler asked his usual bedtime question. "Daddy, are we still homeless?" "No, buddy. Tomorrow we're going to start building our forever home, and we're going to help lots of other families build theirs too." Justice had been served, forgiveness was possible, and hope had replaced despair. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of our new house in Morrison Memorial Village, watching the sun rise over a community that had grown far beyond Charles's original vision. What started as 14 rebuilt homes had become a model village of 65 houses, a community center, medical clinic, daycare facility, and vocational training center. The morning routine had become my favorite time of day. Emma walked to school with her best friend Sarah Patel, chattering about their science project on weather patterns. Tyler rode his bicycle in careful circles around our cul-de-sac, still proudly wearing the training wheels he'd finally mastered. Linda appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee, her hair growing back thick and healthy after her final cancer screening showed complete remission. The stress of homelessness and family rejection had been replaced by purpose and community connection. He asked, "The Morrison Foundation board meeting is at 9, she reminded me. "Are you ready for the expansion presentation?" I nodded, still amazed that I was preparing to address senators and military officials about replicating our community model in 12 other states. Charles had been right about finding meaning in suffering. Our tornado experience had become the foundation for helping thousands of other families. Jorge Ramirez waved from his front yard where he was loading tools into his truck. He'd become our head of construction, overseeing village maintenance and training other residents in skilled trades. His oldest son had earned a full scholarship to the University of Nebraska's engineering program. Raj Patel had opened a grocery store and pharmacy in the village's commercial district, providing convenient services while creating jobs for other residents. His daughter Priya was studying medicine, inspired by the community health services that had helped so many families stabilize their lives. The village had attracted attention from urban planners and social workers around the world. We hosted delegations from other countries studying our integrated approach to disaster recovery and veteran support. But the real success was measured in smaller moments: children playing safely in yards, families gathering for community dinners, neighbors helping neighbors through temporary setbacks. Charles arrived precisely at 8:30 for our weekly breakfast meeting, a tradition that had started during those first overwhelming weeks of construction planning. He'd bought a house in the village, claiming he needed to stay close to monitor his investment, but everyone knew he'd found the family and community he'd been searching for since David's death. "Ready for the congressional testimony next week?" he asked, settling into our kitchen table routine. "As ready as a former drywall installer can be for speaking to federal lawmakers." "You're not a drywall installer anymore, Donovan. You're a community development expert who happens to have real-world experience with the problems we're trying to solve." That perspective shift had taken months to internalize. Charles had insisted on sending me to conferences and training programs, building expertise to match the platform the viral video had created. Tyler burst through the kitchen door, backpack bouncing with excitement. "Uncle Charlie, did you remember you're coming to my show and tell today? Wouldn't miss it, buddy. Are you going to tell your class about the new playground design and about how tornadoes can't hurt us anymore because we have the special basement and the warning sirens?" Emma followed more sedately, her homework folder organized with typical 6-year-old precision. "Daddy, Mrs. Johnson wants to know if you can come talk to our class about community helpers." "I'd be honored, sweetheart." Charles watched these ordinary family interactions with continued amazement. David would have loved seeing this. Kids who feel safe and supported, parents who have hope for the future. After the children left for school, Linda joined us to review the day's schedule. Her role as village wellness coordinator had evolved into a position with the statewide Veteran Services Department developing programs for military families facing mental health challenges. Dr. Peterson wants to include our trauma recovery data in her presentation to the VA, Linda reported. Emma and Tyler's improvement scores are helping prove that housing stability directly impacts children's emotional healing. It was hard to believe those confident, happy children were the same terrified kids who'd slept in our car just 18 months ago. The morning news was playing on the kitchen television, and I was startled to see Troy's face appear on screen. The reporter was covering his sentencing hearing for the federal fraud charges. Former contractor Troy Matthews was sentenced today to 3 years in federal prison for embezzlement and tax fraud. Matthews' victims included his own parents, from whom he stole over $100,000 while they provided him free housing. I felt a complex mixture of emotions watching my brother led away in handcuffs. Justice had been served, but there was no satisfaction in seeing family destroyed, even family that had betrayed us. The prosecution noted that Matthews' actions occurred while his homeless brother and children were seeking shelter from tornado damage. The reporter continued, "This case became a national symbol of family dysfunction and community responsibility." Charles muted the television. Any regrets about how this all played out? About Troy facing consequences? No. About my parents learning hard lessons about priorities? No. But I do regret that it took federal investigators to make our family honest with each other. Linda squeezed my hand. Sometimes crisis reveals who people really are, but sometimes it also gives people a chance to become who they're supposed to be. That wisdom had guided our approach to reconciling with my parents. After their public apology, we'd gradually rebuilt a relationship based on clear boundaries and mutual respect. They visited the children monthly following our rules about respectful communication and supportive grandparenting. Mom had started volunteering at the village daycare center, finding purpose in caring for children whose families were rebuilding their lives. Dad had donated his roofing expertise to village construction projects, working alongside Jorge to teach other residents skilled trades. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Emma had told me after their last visit. It means giving people chances to be better. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the Morrison Foundation conference room, where senators, generals, and policy experts were gathered to hear our expansion proposal. Looking around the table at the powerful people who now sought our input on military family policy, I thought about the journey from that desperate night at my parents' door. Senators, thank you for your time, I began. 18 months ago, my family was homeless and rejected by our own relatives after losing everything in a tornado. Today, we're here to discuss how to prevent other military families from facing that same crisis. The presentation went smoothly, covering our integrated model of housing services and community support. But the questions that followed focused on the human elements that couldn't be captured in policy documents. Mr. Matthews, what would you tell military families who are currently facing housing instability? Asked Senator Williams. I tell them that their service matters, that their sacrifices are seen and valued, and that temporary setbacks don't define their worth. Most importantly, I tell them that family isn't just the people you're born to. Family is the people who choose to stand with you when times get difficult. After the meeting, Charles and I walked through the village streets, past houses where children played in yards and adults worked in community gardens. David's $12,000 has become a $40 million community development project, Charles reflected. Even he couldn't have imagined this impact, but he would have understood it. Military service teaches you that individual sacrifice can protect something larger than yourself. We stopped at the memorial garden that anchored the village center. David's name was engraved on the central stone, surrounded by the names of other fallen soldiers from families who now lived in the community. Emma and Tyler came running from the playground, Tyler's training wheels finally removed from his bicycle. Emma's backpack full of books she was reading above grade level. "Daddy, look what I learned," Tyler called, pedaling confidently in wide circles around the memorial garden. I see you, buddy. You're riding like a champion. Emma hugged Charles around the waist. Uncle Charlie, are you staying for dinner? Mommy is making that soup you like. I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart. As we walked home together, I reflected on the profound lessons our journey had taught us. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters. Family loyalty is earned through actions not inherited through blood. Trauma can become the foundation for helping others heal. Justice may be delayed, but it is not denied when people have the courage to stand up for what's right. But perhaps the most important lesson came from watching my children thrive in a community built from our deepest suffering. They had learned that home isn't just a building that can be destroyed by storms. Home is the people who choose to love and support you through every crisis. That evening, as we gathered around our dinner table with Charles Jorge's family and the Patels, Tyler asked his new favorite bedtime question. Daddy, are there other families who need help like we did? Yes, buddy, lots of families. Then we should help them, right? Like Uncle Charlie helped us. That's exactly what we're going to do, son. That's exactly what we're going to do. Outside thunder rumbled in the distance, bringing spring rain to water the gardens, where hope was growing from ground that had once held only destruction. The warning sirens were silent. The community was prepared, and families were safe. This was what redemption looked like, not just surviving the storm, but becoming the shelter that protects others from their own storms. Have you ever experienced a moment when losing everything led you to discover what truly mattered in your life? I'd love to hear your stories about finding unexpected strength during difficult times, or discovering that family is more about choice than blood. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find hope in their own storms. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about resilience and redemption. And share this with someone who might need to hear that better days are possible, even after the worst disasters. Thank you for letting me share our journey with you. And remember, sometimes the tornado that destroys your house is actually clearing the ground for something even more beautiful to grow.